You've heard it from us. Big prediction on Life of the Party is that the working class green plumber comrade Hannah Spencer is going to smash apart the chat GPT Nazi Matt Goodwin.
Brilliant. Man, he's been dug out in this episode so hard.
We got to get his name in the title. Hello and welcome to this week's Life of the Party, a deep dive into everything to do with left-wing political parties in Britain. I'm your host Jonas Marvin, and I'm here with my friends and comrades Shanice McBean.
Hello, hello.
And Joe Todd.
Hello.
Thanks for all your support over these last few months, guys. It's been great. We're going from strength to strength. If you're dissatisfied with only hearing our lovely voices, then fear not. We'll be coming to Bristol, Norwich and Brighton and to hang out and speak to you lovely radicals, whether you're Greens or your party activists or neither, very soon. So keep your eyes peeled. Just to say, with this episode, we decided to take a little bit of a break from the very exciting Central Executive Committee elections of your party. And we're going to be honing in on a particular upcoming electoral event that represents something of a crossroads in the ongoing crisis of British politics and the opportunities that poses for parties to the left of Labour. So let's get straight into it and have a look at the party-related story of the week. Joe, what you got for us?
Well, there is a by-election, and by-elections are very exciting things because they enable you to get a bit of an insight into what people think of the government of the day. They give political journalists something to flock around that isn't Westminster based, and it gives us the opportunity to dig into spreadsheets and demographic data and, have a proper look at a bit of the country that we wouldn't usually look at. And this time it's in Gorton and Denton. So this Gorton and Denton is an area of Manchester, and basically what happened is that Andy Burnham, a Labour MP, resigned on Thursday the 22nd of January due to ill health, and this triggered a by-election. The specific controversy around this by-election is that Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, wanted to stand in it. And the reason he wanted to stand in it is because he wants to become Labour leader, and to become the leader of the Labour Party, you have to be an MP. Like, that's just part of the Labour rulebook. The only way to be the leader of the Labour Party is to be an MP, unlike the Green Party. So Andy wanted to stand in this. This caused a big, furore in the media, and there was all these questions as to whether Keir Starmer would block him or whether Keir Starmer's people on the NEC would block him. And lo and behold, on Sunday, the 25th of January, just 5 days before we were recording this, Labour's NEC did vote to block Burnham from standing. It was a subgroup of Labour's NEC, so it's not called Executive Committee, it's not called Steering Group, but it's kind of like a senior group from the National Executive Committee. And this group was dominated by the Labour right in various iterations. Keir Starmer actually attended the meeting, as he is able to do, and spoke in favour. I don't know if he spoke actually against Burnham standing, but he definitely spoke in such a way that signalled to people that he really cared about this and wanted to spend political capital on it. And yeah, this group voted 8-1 in favour of Burnham not being allowed to run. It's worth being specific about this as well. They didn't say, no, you cannot be the candidate. They said you are not allowed to stand down from being Labour mayor in Manchester to contest the seat. The reason they give is because they might lose it to reform, as in they might lose the mayoralty to reform, which, if you're a sitting Labour government and saying that you're going to lose, one of the UK's biggest cities to reform, that's just like such a crazy admission of weakness. And they also talk about like the cost and disruption of having to run a mayoral campaign. I find it very interesting that they talk about democracy and elections as in terms of like cost and disruption, as if they were, a mere inconvenience that gets in the way of their, management of the state. Anyway, they blocked him. That happened on Sunday. Since, Burnham has been pretty pissed off. He's publicly pushed back on claims around the kind of like decision-making and briefing, saying that lots of the Westminster insiders are kind of lying about what happened there. But also it's quite notable that there hasn't been that much kickback amongst Labour MPs. And that potentially speaks to how pliant and kind of non-entitous Is that a word? That's not a word.
No.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is a lot of the Labour cohort that came in the last election, all these MPs are just like complete non-entities that have very little politics. Yeah. So that happened within Labour. Labour is still to decide their candidate, but the other parties have been lining up their candidates over the last week. On Tuesday, Reform selected Matt Goodwin to run. Matt Goodwin is a former academic, emphasis on the former. He started out...
There is actually another F word you could replace former with, and it's failed.
Failed.
Former academic, current waste
knobhead. Like black hole for charisma. There's many words we could attribute to Matt Goodwin and his froggy little fascist face. But anyway, he's running. He's running as the Reform candidate, and yeah, he was an academic. He used to nominally study the far right, wrote books on them from a supposedly objective standpoint, and has over the years become essentially like a far right activist, and has a Friday night show on GB News, and regularly questions the Britishness of people that were born in Britain based on their religion or their race. It's also the case that the Green Party have now selected their candidate. The Green Party have selected a local councillor and plumber called Hannah Spencer. Hannah has lived in Greater Manchester all of her life. She is the most senior councillor. I had information on her and now I've lost it, but she's like a very senior councillor in the local area. And she spoke at the Greens Organise conference event that I went to and was brilliant, to be honest. Really, really brilliant. She also has 4 dogs, which is nice. 4 greyhounds. And then the Workers' Party. The Workers' Party, who will also contest the seat, this is George Galloway's kind of anti-woke / left party, have not selected their candidate yet. It was briefed that it was going to be Shahbaz Sawar, who is a local councillor that unseated the Labour deputy leader of the council back in the last council elections. But then Galloway seems to have rolled back from that, so it's not clear. It looks like it probably will be Shahbaz Sawar. Galloway was tweeting positive things about him a few days ago, but that's not completely confirmed. And yeah, by the 3rd of February, we will know the full candidate list. And then the by-election takes place on the 26th of February. So it's less than a month from today.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are times in British politics where processes become events, right? Like where you see all of like these various different tendencies and processes that are emerging culminate into a kind of single event. And I think this is quite possibly one of them. I mean, just on Burnham, I was watching, he did a talk with the Institute for Fiscal Studies a couple of months ago now, and it's just worth like thinking a little bit about his agenda. He talks like about like a business friendly socialism. There's a lot of stuff about devolving state power to enable local government facilitated growth, regional rebalancing, and sort of high tech green reindustrialization. But like often in practice, like the agenda is like real estate led regeneration, which is something that he's very well known for in Manchester, and like using land for green, high tech and creative industry jobs that employ like a pretty low share of workers. And it's just like, I say all of that because, it's obviously better than Starmerism, but it's not like the most radical agenda in the world. And I think it just speaks to like how much under the kind of weight of reaction and technocracy, something that you were kind of alluding to in your introduction, Joe, it just speaks to the kind of closed conditions in Labour for radicalism, and that even this man could not get on the ballot. I mean, good lies always have a hint of truth, but the kind of the rationale raised against, because the Labour Party are not doing well financially, right? But the rationale raised against Burnham, be it running for the Gorton and Denton seat, is just so remarkably thin and technocratic. And for some people on the Labour right, it's really clear that stopping Burnham was central not just to saving Starmer, but also to easing Wes Streeton's journey to number 10. But for those who were invested in defending Starmer himself, kind of technocratic managerial bores that they are, there is a big recognition that this administration and the politics of the Labour right are really on the fucking edge. I mean, like, they are running the risk of throwing away a seat that Labour had an absolute majority in and have held for over a century. Like, it's, it's pretty spectacular. I mean, as my kind of friend said to me the other day, accelerate the contradictions. Let's have Wes for leader. Let's get this party out of the way kind of vibe. But that's the kind of stakes we're talking about in this by-election.
Yeah, I hear that. I think So Andy Burnham represents the faction within Labour that's often termed the soft left, but they have tried to kind of articulate their politics in kind of more formal and theoretical terms over recent years. This idea of radical realism, which is a contradiction in terms, right? The idea that you can both be radical and status quo at the same time is, linguistically nonsense. But the idea behind it is holding this traditional Labour coalition together of the left and soft left, with the radical probably on social and culture issues, but also the realism economically that can hold kind of, business within the Labour Party and reassure capitalism that, Labour is the party of capital and business. And it's a tried and tested political formula, but I think is a real threat to kind of Keir Starmer's anti-strategism of kind of booting the left out of the party and hoping that he has the kind of social base and electoral coalition to keep the Labour Party going. But I guess I wonder, do you think that this idea of radical realism is a real threat to Keir Starmer, or does it represent the same contradictions that it always has?
I think Andy Burnham or Angela Rayner or potentially Ed Miliband or Anne Wet Streeting, they're all obviously personal threats to Keir Starmer insofar as Keir Starmer's just like, he's like a lame duck. He's done. You know what I mean? Like, and it's really, all of this is just about planning his succession and who's going to have the best shot of winning a potential leadership election after him. I think in terms of the politics, I think a lot of it is about affect and expectation. And like I've been saying this with Starmer recently, like, it's funny. Starmer has done some stuff which is distinctly social democratic. You know what I mean? Like GB Energy, for instance, or wage rises for the public sector, and like big public sector wage deals that he did as soon as he came in. But he's got absolutely zero credit for these things, rightly, because he framed himself right from the off as an anti-left project. You know what I mean? That's how he wanted to be known as this. Like, he lied in the leadership election and then he defined himself in opposition to the left in a very authoritarian way. And you can look at that with him expelling, like left-wing Labour MPs from the party. You can look at that with him cracking down on rights to protest or going after Palestine action. Like, just so many things that have been symbolic of his premiership have been either attacks on the left or attacks on the left's coalition. And you can read all of the anti-migrant stuff as part of that too. So it's like, in that light, he's never going to get any credit for doing anything good correctly. And I actually think that, Burnham, who if he got him, wouldn't do that. Burnham would try and build a broad tent and be very pluralistic and consensual, and one would want the left to be part of that tent, not in a leadership position, but part of that tent. He could do some stuff which is actually quite similar to what Starmer has done, but just get a lot more credit, just because of the story he's telling and just because of the vibe that he creates. And I find that very interesting.
I guess in a context where Starmer is being squeezed from the left and the left is insurgent, at least electorally, with Green Party and Zach Polansky and with your party, although they might not see your party as a threat, but certainly the Green Party. I guess there has been a pressure for him to tack to the left, which we're seeing, for example, with Wes Streeting's pitches for leadership, his covert pitches for leadership in the media. He's tacking to the left on things like Palestine. He's tacking to the left on protest, on Trump, on the NHS in some respects even. But I guess it's a story that we've seen before with Wes Streeting, with Keir Starmer, this kind of flirtation with left-wing ideas and kind of building a left-wing coalition and then abandoning it at the earliest opportunity. So I suspect, and I could be completely wrong with this, but I suspect Burnham, even if he miraculously somehow gerrymandered himself into a position where he could be an MP and became a leader, would very quickly fall foul of those same contradictions.
Yeah, I broadly think that's correct, to be honest with you. I mean, it's just worth saying, isn't it? Like, Starmer is not a good politician. Like, he's just He's just like so incredibly uncharismatic. It's unbelievable. Whereas like you wouldn't say that for Burnham. Like you just wouldn't. But there's definitely a case here where, like, you know, we've kind of talked on this podcast before about to what extent, you know, what's the political composition of the Labour Party membership? Is there still a substantive soft left in membership terms in the Labour Party? How much has that been eroded by the fact that we don't know the membership figures, we don't know how many people have left over the past year, all of that sort of stuff. But it's obviously clear, just based on, you know, what they're doing, that you know, maybe with the exception of Keir Starmer, that like all of the people who are chewing on his corpse still feel that there is a soft left membership in the Labour Party to appeal to, regardless of what we actually know about the composition of the Labour membership. And also that on economic questions and on the cost of living, and particularly in Burnham's terms on fiscal politics, that they understand that the public is quite far to the left of Keir Starmer. And so, you know, all of that being said and done, Starmer is a different beast to Burnham in lots of ways, and, you know, kind of has that history of being a state apparatchik. You know, counter-revolution against the left was like front and center of his kind of, as you call it, strategism from the beginning, Shanice. I've never heard that word before, but I'm going to be stealing it from now on. But when it comes to Burnham, I do think you're right. Like, I mean, for all of the talk in the here and now, he will have to confront the right of the Labour Party if he was to become leader, which is seemingly off the cards now for a while. And they will be vicious with him, I suspect. But then he's also going to have to confront the bond markets, which he's talked about in the past, and the Treasury, if he were to become Prime Minister, let alone the Bank of England. And I just think, like, I don't have much confidence in a figure like Burnham, someone who, you know, really flirted with the Blairite wing of the party back in the day, supported the Iraq War, have no faith that this guy is going to give any meaningful resistance to the bond markets, the Treasury, the Bank of England, maybe the Labour right. But yeah, well, I guess we won't find out anytime soon.
I do agree with that, but I do think it's worth drawing, like, just analytically, it's worth drawing distinctions between Starmer and Burnham if we think they exist. And I do think that, I think Starmer and Streeting are of a mould and of a type where they have a like an anti-left orientation ideology, right? And that's kind of what they're setting out to do. Whereas I think Burnham genuinely does want to try and do social democracy. Like, I don't think the Manchester mayoralty and him saying not resigning from Corbyn's cabinet when everyone else did, and I don't think all of that is just because he's like playing the long game to be the Labour leader and appeal to the membership of the Labour Party, so then he can tack really hard right when he becomes leader. Like, I think he earnestly wants to give social democracy a go, which is why he's talking about the bond markets even before he's an MP. I think it's more just the reality that doing social democracy in an era of low growth, where you can't just split that growth up between capital and labour, it is just really hard. And as you say, Jonas, you come up against all of these antagonistic forces very, very, very quickly. But I think that is a key difference. Like, I don't think Starmer ever wanted really to do that. Streeting will not do that. Like, Starmer and Streeting just see themselves as managers of the state. I do think Burnham would like to change stuff. I agree with you. I don't think he has the will or the grounding to do it.
You can also look at his, you know, record as mayor, and I think locally, you know, a lot of the left and a lot of residents understand him maybe slightly differently. I think, for example, of the campaign for the Manchester 10, who were 10 lads who were locked up under joint enterprise style laws for text messages that they had sent in a WhatsApp group. Some of them have had their convictions overturned. You know, huge injustices took place, and he was very much shut-eyed, nothing to see, nothing to hear, because he was a major supporter and backer of the Greater Manchester Police, and in fact increased people's council tax in order to increase funding for the Greater Manchester Police. So, you know, there have been examples like this. There are other examples around regeneration projects where there have been local campaigns for, you know, quite, I think, reasonable demands for change in working class communities that he's been completely unresponsive to. If that's how he behaves at a local level, what would that look like when he's got these big national and international pressures on him as Prime Minister? So, you know, I'm very skeptical and doubtful that he's much more than aesthetically different to characters like West Streeting and Keir Starmer, and that actually, like most politicians, under the pressure of the actual job, he would bend and mould as capital needs him to. One thing, though, that is going to be interesting is the aftermath of this within the Labour Party, and in particular for Keir Starmer. I think although he's probably batted off his most formidable opponent in Andy Burnham, I think this whole episode leaves him looking really quite weak and frail. A real leader, a strong leader, someone who is confident in their leadership and confident in their position, would be open arms ready for a challenger to take them on. And, you know, this is exemplified by Corbynism. People thought Corbyn wasn't a threat. And so, you know, in 2015, people were like, yeah, let's have it. Or before 2015, people were like, yeah, let's have it. Let's have them on the ballot because there's no threat here. And the fact that he wasn't willing to have even the smallest possibility of Andy Burnham levelling a leadership challenge, I think shows his own anxieties in his leadership, as he should be. But I think people like Wes Streeting are going to be smelling blood after this.
Yeah. And it's a big, you know, it's a big question as to who's going to stick the knife in and when. No one wants to be the one to actually do that because it means that you've got less of a chance to win the leadership election. There's also a question as to who can get enough MPs to get on the ballot. It's likely that Streeting can. It's likely that Rayner can if she wants to do it. It's unclear if someone like Miliband could. But I think the broader kind of strategic question that I'm interested in here is what do these different configurations of Labour leadership mean for the Greens and your party, but mostly the Greens. And, you know, obviously if Burnham had ended up leading the Labour Party before the next election, it would have to a certain extent tied the Greens' hands in that it would have made it difficult to run an insurgent left project to the left of Labour in the context of maybe letting reform in by kind of like decomposing Labour and trying to destroy Labour. There'd have been a lot of pressure, I think, on Zach to work with Burnham, and I get the impression that he probably would have in some way. But that obviously changes massively if it's Streeting. You know, like Streeting is a completely different beast. And whether you think this is good or not, I think depends on whether you think the Greens can, I think, both like destroy the Labour Party or overtake the Labour Party as the left of centre party in this country, and also maybe stop reform at the same time. Because you can obviously see a timeline where at the next election, Labour and the Greens are nuking it out to try and be, you know, the left party in the country. This means it's very hard for people to vote tactically. And even though people are terrified of reform, it lets reform in. Now, if you have a more relaxed view of reform and you think, oh, well, really reform is just the Tory party and they're going to do more Thatcherite stuff. And obviously that's bad, but it's kind of worth maybe letting them in to recompose the left of British politics. Then you take one view. If you take the other view, which Zach Plansky seems to take, at least rhetorically and publicly, that reform are an existential threat and they're fascists, then it just leads you to a very different place with regards to cooperation with the Labour Party, whoever's the leader, frankly. So I think these are how the different configurations of leadership in the Labour Party, and we should say configurations because, you know, you could see Streeting as leader and Miliband as Chancellor, for instance. That's not crazy. And that's then, you know, like a difficult and mixed picture for some parts of the left. But these different configurations of leadership really, really change the calculations, I think, for Zach and the Greens.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's funny, like, because we mentioned the radical realism of Andy Burnham, but obviously the Keir Starmer was someone who talked about radical realism too, 2020 in particular. And I think that kind of alludes to something which has a kind of double-sided importance, both in terms of the Labour Party and in terms of the Greens, to kind of Joe's point, which is that really underlying all of this is and it's a structural crisis as well, but I'm going to speak on the particular plane, which is that social democracy or its variants, you know, social liberalism, Blairism, etc., really struggling to define itself in the current moment. What the parameters of its politics are, what its alternative are, in precisely those conditions of low growth that you talk about. And like, you know, Andy Burnham is indicative in this respect as well. You know, on the one hand, really upfront about regional rebalancing, and, you know, the transport system in Manchester is like it's like really good. Like the little stuff like that matters to people's lives, right? Because it's not that little, it's like really huge. But at the same time, like the gentrification is like an absolutely central axis to like Andy Burnham's governance and his politics. And I think this is where the Greens really have a little bit of an open door here, particularly if Andy Burnham is not the person that they're going to be against, because they get to be able to define an agenda, which, you know, they've done very tentatively so far because it's a very fresh project that could, I just think, really cause Labour some huge difficulties and really kind of shift British politics to the left. Whether they do that is a different question. I don't know. Like social democracy is in the form of Labourism and its various wings is just looks fucked, basically. And the Greens are they're in a really brilliant position to redefine those terms, basically.
But also in a really intimidating position, because are the Greens organisationally, ideologically, personnel-wise going to be ready to go into government in any form at the next election? Which is like a real possibility. And it's not always bad to wait. Like it might not be the best thing for the Greens to go into government if the terms of government are not in their favour.
All right then, time for our hot take. Shanice, you're up this week.
So my hot take is going to be about our guy, Matt Goodwin. In fact, definitely not our guy.
Yeah, your guy, not my guy.
A guy, the guy, some guy, not our guy. Look, I'm just going to tell it to you straight. I think Matt Goodwin is a fantastic candidate for the left and a pretty dire candidate for reform. And I guess my hot take is that I think reform could win this by-election in Gorton and Denton, but actually Matt Goodwin is probably going to lose it. So why do I think that? And why am I so confident? And why am I kind of so bold in my proclamation? So who is Matt Goodwin? He's a bit of a chameleon character. He's gone on what you might euphemistically call a political journey. And Joe mentioned earlier that he kind of started off as an academic. So he worked at Kent University and he wrote books on both the British National Party and UKIP. And both books were in some ways critical. Certainly not, he wasn't writing it kind of as a native, as being kind of in those projects. He was writing it as an external observer. And he seems to have transitioned from kind of a commentator on the British far right to a propagandist of the British far right. And I think what's facilitated this is a fall. So like other characters who maybe started more left-wing or at least kind of in that liberal centre, like Naomi Wolf, I've mentioned before, Candace Owens, even some kind of more on our side, like Nina Power, and they kind of have this shift towards the right and to the far right. Often what precedes this is some kind of fall, some kind of collapse, some kind of nadir. And in Matt Goodwin's case, this was the collapse of his academic career, the failure of his academic career. And what's interesting about how he writes about this is it's just full of loathing and resentment. He's clearly like a wounded puppy and trots out all of the usual tropes to explain why his academic career collapsed. You know, he writes about the liberal left Brexiteers, you know, manoeuvring against him at work and stifling his opportunities for progression. He talks about difficulties securing grants and publishing research because of his kind of right-leaning politics. He talks about, you know, these kind of injuries that he experienced because of the political and cultural left, and how he never got a job at an elite university and only ended up at, quote, a non-elite university like Kent, because the elite classes of these, you know, more established universities were blocking his career. And so he's got this narrative of victimhood that kind of just permeates all of his writing on what happened in his career. And it ended, I think it was in 2024, he took a voluntary severance from Kent University and lost his professorship. And that was kind of the end of his academic career. Since then, he's clearly been on a mission of recognition, like many failed academics or kind of failed politicians. He's almost going for the influencer bag now. So he's, got a Substack and he boasts is, one of the most well-read British Substacks, got about 80,000 subscribers. He's got a segment on GB News. And it's just clear that the narratives that he's spouting are just kind of classic far-right victimhood. He talks about the Great Replacement often. And what's interesting about how he talks about the Great Replacement, so there's this great piece by James Bloodworth that kind of goes into the detail of Matt Goodwin's trajectory and journey, and actually just how anti-academic his current work is. So his theorizing of the Great Replacement, for example, excludes anyone who has an immigrant parent as being British. So this would exclude also King Charles and Winston Churchill. And this is the kind of data that he's using to argue that Britain isn't British anymore. Just completely absurd anti-academic waffle and nonsense. He has refused to back down on the idea that Black and brown people can't be British. And he also defended the 2024 racist riots where people were going around, setting fire to migrant hotels and attacking Black and brown people. And he's defended this as legitimate concerns being expressed by the British public. This guy is completely lacking in any and all charisma. And I think just replaces and kind of uses and has lots of ego and status and kind of like the grift for ego and status in replace for actual personality. And then I guess the final thing on him is he just has a history of being really, really wrong. Just being really, really wrong. I'll give you a quick list. In 2015, he said that UKIP would win 12 seats in the general election.
Lol.
They didn't. They scraped one. Got famous for being wrong because he was so wrong he had to eat a page of his book on national TV. Because he said Labour wouldn't receive 38% of the vote share in 2015, and they did. In 2017, sorry. He predicted that Remain were going to win the Brexit vote. He predicted that Trump would lose in 2016 and win in 2020. So this guy is just... he is a really... what's the word I'm looking for? Just a really sad character, And I think that really comes across in his politics and how he speaks and what he bangs his drum about and what he propagandizes about. He has no vision beyond kind of, boring right-wing talking points about the Great Replacement and about, immigration. He is not very personable, not very likable. I loved your description of him having a froggy fascist face. Yeah.
He does. He's like the Pepe meme, but like a real person with like flesh. It's crazy.
And so you could get the idea. I don't like him, but the reason why this is relevant to the by-election is because actually the Green Party candidate is such a contrast to Matt Goodwin as a character. And I think this matters for who it lives in Gorton and Denton. So let's look at Hannah Spencer in contrast, who was elected and selected as the Green Party candidate on 457 votes to Faisal Raza Khan's 65 and Sarah Wakefield's 63. So, overwhelming support in kind of her local party. She's young, she's 34, she's lived in Greater Manchester for her whole life, and she's been a plumber. It's not only her career, it's been her career since she was 16. And she's currently training also to be a plasterer. This is someone who's been a councillor in Trafford Council since May 2023 and has a reputation locally as being someone who's not only part of the community, but serves the community. And that's her record. Let's think about her as from an identity perspective now. If you just look at her, You just look at her, like aesthetically, physically. She just looks like the Britain that the far right idealise, this working class woman.
So true.
Who has a northern accent, who just looks normal. And she looks like the very person the far right are trying to, reach out to and monopolize and swallow up within their project, except she's got good politics, and except she's got a message of hope, a message of, bringing communities together, a message of class antagonism and class war, and a message of anti-racism. There was a really good video that I saw of her where she said, the issue isn't migrants, it's not trans people, it's not Muslims, it's not people fleeing war, it's not people who moved here for economic reasons, it's the people who have broken the country are the millionaires and the super rich. And this is a candidate who has also been endorsed by the Muslim Vote UK locally, who are endorsing the Greens. And so all of this, I think, comes together when you consider what and who Gorton and Denton are. So let's look a little bit at the constituency itself. It's a new constituency. So it's formed off of the redrawing of the boundaries that took place for the 2024 election. So it's bringing a new cohort of the Greater Manchester's electorate together. 20,000 people live there, 40% Christian, 30% Muslim. That's a huge block. And of those that Christian cohort, and we're talking a lot of working class people as well. So Gorton and Denton is overrepresented nationally in terms of deprivation of all levels. And it's also overrepresented in terms of its disabled population. It's underrepresented in terms of educational qualifications and levels of education. So, you can say that there's a strong constituency of Gorton and Denton, which is working class. Will they be more attracted to a failed, completely uncharismatic influencer who talks in this posh academic accent? Or will they be more attracted to a local who served her community, who has a normal working class job, who understands people's issues? So I think, Matt Goodwin, a laughable choice for reform. I actually can't believe why they've gone for someone like him. And I think the Greens have selected a fantastic candidate. And I actually will say it, I think the Greens are going to trounce Matt Goodwin. Will they have trounced reform had they chosen a better candidate? Don't know. But the Greens are going to trounce Matt Goodwin.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing I disagree with there, and I've been really trying to work this out. Like, what is reform's logic? Now, like, part of me thinks they just don't have organisation in the area, and they just don't have people in the area. Like, they didn't run council candidates in Tameside in the last council elections. They've never had a strong base in the area. They've never like had any big victories in the area. It might just be the case that they just didn't have anyone local and good and appropriate. It was also rumoured that they were going after Simon Danczuk, the ex-Labour MP.
Oh my God, that would have been worse.
I know. So Simon Danczuk, like the ex-Labour MP that got kicked out of Parliament for texting a 17-year-old girl, like sexually explicit stuff. And they're like, I can't work this out, to be honest. I mean, look, maybe that's not true. Maybe they were never actually asking him, but that's what was rumoured. I assume.
But do you know what? That does raise an interesting point, because, there is the conception of reform as a one-man band, and that actually they have very, very little talent. And maybe this is reflective of that. Reform is Nigel Farage. Beyond that, their talent pool is kind of crap.
I mean, it really would suggest it. And like, I suppose their logic with Matt Goodwin is he has a big national profile compared to Hannah Spencer. Obviously, it's going to be a quick by-election. Maybe they think they can just, blitz it on social media and use his profile to just like turn out his people. But the problem with that is that if you look at the constituency, you can't win it with just the right wing base. You just can't. Yeah. I mean, it's as you said, it's a weird constituency. And it's a weird constituency because it's very new and it's two quite different areas. You've got Gorton and then you've got Denton, and Gorton's the Manchester bit basically, which is really diverse. Like lots of Muslims, lots of students. And then you've got the Denton bit, which is actually a town on the edge of Manchester. It's not actually the city itself. And it's a lot more white. It's twice as white, I think, as the Gorton bit. fewer graduates. And, you know, it is this kind of like tale of two Manchesters, as Rob Ford put it in this piece that I was reading, where you have the Green base in one side of the constituency, and then, you know, theoretically the Reform base in the other side of the constituency. The problem is for Reform is that there's twice as many registered voters in the Green bit as there is in Tameside. So it's just like you can't win there by just turning out your base. And frankly, Hannah Spencer would be as you kind of implied, Shanice, the ideal candidate for Reform in this seat, you know? Like, as you say, like, woman who is the image of what the far right think of as like the Britain they want to see. She could have gone on all of the far right talking points of how, like, you know, like the left and the country aren't like defending working class women, blah blah blah. Like, she's a plumber. Like, but you know what I mean? Like, if you survey plumbers, you're gonna get more Reform supporters than you are Green supporters by a large order of magnitude. And I just think that the party has done incredibly well selecting her and building her up. And I think it speaks, hopefully, it speaks to the Greens' ambitions as a national project where they are trying to build beyond the typical demographics that you'll find in left-wing coalitions. And it makes me really excited. It also makes me really desperate for her to win, to be honest. Like, I think it'd be very, very meaningful if she wins this by-election.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Rob Ford piece. So this is Rob Ford. He's like a pollster, academic, a psophologist, got this Substack swingometer.
It's annoying because he's like a massive centrist, but this post was really good.
It was great.
It's really good. We'll link it in the show notes. It was like genuinely a really good piece.
And it was great because he was a colleague of Goodwin before Goodwin's lurch to the right. So they co-wrote one of the books that Shanice talked about, Revolt on the Right. And he offers like loads of like hilarious, useful insight into his former colleague, and makes the really important point that running somebody with the kind of message in discipline of Matt Goodwin in a seat where you want to motivate potential Reform voters and discourage anti-Reform voters is just an unbelievably stupid thing to do. I mean, getting to the bottom of why the right have done this is like is a big question. Like they clearly haven't learned a lesson that the left has had to learn quite a lot, which sometimes is quite useful, having a division of labour between politicians and intellectuals. Whether we, really stretch to call him Matt Goodwin an intellectual is obviously a different question. But did you watch his press conference when he announced he was running?
I watched 5 seconds of it. I wanted to throw my laptop out the window. Like, genuinely,
he spent the entire time.
I wanted to boil my head. It was
he spent the entire time talking about how he's not a Tory, which is just it's just an incredibly bad place to begin your press conference to say you're standing in a seat where Muslims, university graduates, and current students are double the number of like the typical voter base of Reform, and the candidate you're running against, fair enough, you might not know this at this stage, is like, that, like you have both kind of alluded to, that kind of is more of a classic image of a Reform voter than yourself. And so I think, there's the usual talking points in there, right? Like the managed decline, high streets, immigration numbers, shoplifting. Like at one point he was bragging about the fact that he could deliver free pizzas in 30 minutes or something like that. Like it was really,
I'd vote for that.
It was really quite boring. But I think it does highlight a bit of a fork in the road for Reform. Like when you have a hyper leader party, as Shanice alluded to, and you kind of operate on a version of kind of hyper politics, which is really focused around like media interventions, political antagonism, not necessarily building like a big social base, that breeds real problems in terms of actually being able to reproduce a political cadre that can then stand in elections. And you have this other problem really with Reform at the minute, which like it seems at least that they've hit a bit of a ceiling, frankly. And because you have these kind of three pressures. On the one hand, you have a kind of communitarian industrial politics almost, right? Which is like, we want women to have more babies, we want men to be working in factories, and we want the young to start getting off their asses and work properly. Then you have the kind of just outright culturalist fascist politics of someone like Matt Goodwin, which broadly speaking is just not popular in this country. Like if you do lots of like, look at lots of polls about how people feel about a race and all sorts, like that stuff is not that popular in this country, despite how well Reform are doing. And I would say that Reform are doing quite well because they've managed at least to a degree to suppress some of that stuff. And then you have the other kind of pressure on them, which is becoming a dominant tendency in a minute, which is instead of talking about reindustrialization, for example, and giving tax rebates to families that have more children, what they're talking about now is much more in the spirit of the kind of Britannia Unchained wing of British Toryism, like Singapore on the Thames style tax havens and all of this sort of stuff. And it's just not compelling to people. All of the recent Tories that have joined the party over the party, as if I'm a member, have joined Reform over the last couple of months. Like, it does present like a real dent for them and a real limit on their strategy. And I think with Matt Goodwin himself, like, I was watching a video of him the other day, and for him, like, he really talks in terms of a civilizational politics. I was watching this interview with him where he's like, people don't read anymore. Our culture's been decimated by low attention spans, and your kids can't go outside and play on their own anymore because of the immigrants. People are being managed too heavily by the state. And I do think this stuff is, as well as being bullshit, I think it's a double-edged sword for Reform and the right more broadly. Because on the one hand, this stuff does connect with some people's kind of misery, their isolation. It taps into self-improvement cultures, and people kind of, as we've seen around like Trumpism and the ecology there, like, people have a really prevailing distrust of technocracy and authoritarianism. But also, people genuinely do not like being told what to do or being talked down to. And if Goodwin, who is bringing this kind of charismaless, pseudo-academic script, I think he's fucked. Like, sorry, I've said that word too much on the podcast today, but I do feel like this is a bit of a Theresa May situation, where the more he appears in the public eye, the less it benefits him.
Yeah.
And I think we'll really see that. I guess, like, one of the questions I have is that, like, one of Labour's attack lines so far has been on the Greens drugs policy. And I wonder whether this is a bit of a test for the Greens towards, about their social liberalism, because one of the things that's going to come up repeatedly from Reform and Labour in this campaign is law and order. And this does make me wonder to what extent the kind of Polanski Green pride in being woke, how is that going to translate into a one-on struggle against Reform when the attack lines from Goodwin and Farage are going to be totally framed through the lens of migration, crime, and race. The Greens have become a sort of natural home for progressive leftists, and I'm interested to see how that rubs up against electoralism in a by-election that isn't just a by-election. It's a kind of national event.
Yeah, 100%. I think, we do have a test case of this from 2025 in Caerphilly. Not exactly the same kind of situation, but it was a by-election where kind of Labour tanked and Reform were predicted to swoop in and get themselves a new MP, and Plaid Cymru managed to kind of pull through and win that. And I think, part of what happened here was the prospect of Reform was mobilizing for people, and people were willing to kind of put maybe slight differences aside and back behind Plaid Cymru. And I wonder if a similar thing will happen in Gorton and Denton, not only because of the prospects of Reform in Manchester, which is, I think will feel quite significant for people locally, but also the fact that it's Matt Goodwin, and the national profile that he has, and how just controversial he is, and how sourceless he is. I think that will potentially be really mobilizing for people who perhaps, aren't typically motivated to vote and don't usually get out and vote in these sorts of elections, particularly elections outside of a general election. The tendency is that voter turnout is lower, and there's an uphill battle to try for insurgent parties to and for kind of currently sitting parties to win, because voter turnout is often low. So there's that. But there's something else, I think, playing out here too. If you look at the mayoral election from 2024, where Andy Burnham got, well over hundreds of thousands of votes. And if you look at the Green and Reform split there, so Hannah Spencer actually ran in that mayor election, and she got 45,000 votes, which was pretty much the same as Reform got. They got 49,000 votes. So we're not necessarily talking about, obviously it's a completely different electorate. The size of the electorate's different, but Reform haven't necessarily got this, huge groundswell of support in North Manchester and in Gorton and Denton specifically. And then just to go back to Matt Goodwin again, I just completely, I do agree with you, Jonas. Like, I just think people will be entirely unconvinced by what he has to offer. He's the guy of no new ideas. He's trying to bring back race science, for example. I watched a clip of him where he was saying really confidently, in really pseudo-academic language, I just think that in 5 to 10 years' time, just the science is going to come out and people are going to recognize that there are genetic differences between groups of people, and that's just going to be common sense, and it's even common sense now. And he wasn't giving any sources, any pointing towards any legitimate research. He never does that. He just proclaims and pronounces things in a confident Southern voice and thinks that that's enough authority and legitimacy for the things that he says to fly. And I just think it's just, they'd have been better off running some washed up brown Tory, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
I think that would have been better than what Matt Goodwin has to offer.
Yeah, I mean, I think so maybe the pessimistic case, because I agree with everything you said, but maybe the pessimistic case for the Greens is just that it's not necessarily going to be that easy to unite the coalition that we need to unite, or the left of centre vote, or whatever you want to call it. The Workers' Party got 10% here in 2024. In the 2024 general election, the Greens got 13% or 12.9%, I think. It's like the Workers' Party will run. I don't think there'll be any deal done with the Workers' Party. They will take a certain percentage of predominantly the Muslim community. Hopefully it's low, and hopefully it's lower than 10%, but we'll see. And then there's just this all-out battle between Labour and Greens at the moment to be seen as the only force that can beat reform. And it was weird that at the start of the election you had some Labour people basically briefing off the record that they were fucked and the Greens were going to win. And then seemingly they realised that was a terrible thing for them to do, and they're becoming far more disciplined now. And they're really amplifying these polls that are coming out where it's based on like 100 respondents, and it's showing that it's reform first and Labour second. And yeah, it will just be a massive battle between the two parties. If you go on any of the local forums at the moment, there are just clearly people who are covertly activists from both of the parties trying to make the argument that actually Green is the only way that you can beat reform, or Labour is the only way you can beat reform. I was reading some focus group transcripts that were done in the constituency over the last few days of Labour voters from the last election, and the dominant thing is just them trying to work out who to vote for to beat reform. Now, the Greens have I think the Greens have an advantage here in that people, I think, would rather not vote for the current government to beat reform. They would rather vote for something else to beat reform, because Labour are so deeply unpopular. So I think that's a good thing for the Greens. But I think it really will depend on the Greens running a fantastic ground campaign, which is highly, highly visible. And I don't usually say this in elections, because ground campaigns, I've worked on a lot of them and I've helped run them, and they're amazing. They're amazing things to do and be a part of, but they usually contribute 1%, 2%, 3% on the vote margin. They're not massively decisive in most elections. I think the reason they could be massively decisive in this election is because it will probably be won by 1%, 2%, 3%. And also there are just so many voters that may potentially switch, because there are so many voters that are looking to vote tactically to keep reform out. And I think this is the massive advantage. This is the massive advantage the Greens could have, because Labour will not have a strong ground campaign. Labour members are not incentivised to go and knock for their party at the moment. It's embarrassing to go knocking on doors for Labour. It's a horrible experience. The only people out. I mean, I was talking to a local Green activist yesterday to prep for the podcast, and he was saying the only people that are out for Labour are the councillors. It's the councillors and the councillors' partners. There's no Labour members out. I mean, it's the same in Haringey where I live. It's only the Labour councillors that are knocking on doors. No Labour members are going out. And at the same time, I just don't think Reform have high levels of organisation in the constituency either. And could you really see Matt Goodwin going around and doing loads of door knocking and not just getting abused on the street? And then there's clips going viral.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think the ground game is there for the Greens to take. But they have to take it. They've only got 3.5 weeks. They don't have loads of organisation in the constituency. They need to scale up really, really quick.
Didn't Zach Polanski launch the ground campaign this weekend? So he did an event in the constituency over the weekend, last weekend. where he kind of launched the ground campaign and wanted to get out, I think it was like 45,000 leaflets or something like that. So I think they are taking the lessons, for example, of Zoran Mondani and the DSA quite seriously on like how important the field work and knocking on doors and chatting to people actually is. And I think that the word test comes to mind, and I think Jonas used the word fork in the roads, and I think that's absolutely right. There are two questions this election is going to answer. Are the Greens electable in the north in constituencies that don't easily or don't totally map on to their stereotyped kind of electorate and their typical aesthetic? And can they face off reform electorally? And if the answer to those questions are yes, they are electable in the north, even in places that aren't the kind of typical Green electorate, and yes, they can beat reform, that is going to completely throw in the bin the idea that Labour are in any way needed to beat reform in the 2029 general election. It's going to completely change the boundaries of politics in Britain and completely shift the balance of power in Greens' favour. So it's a huge, potentially historic election, and I don't think we should underestimate that, which is why I think, you know, the rumours of the Workers' Party, you know, of GB and your party potentially, you know, not recognising this for what it is quite worrying.
It is also worth saying as well that, like, we've talked about how, you know, Denton, which is the kind of whiter, seemingly more reform-leaning part of the constituency and only, you know, makes up a third of the constituency compared to the two sides on Thames side, is also just, it's not an area very open for voting for right-wing politicians of any stripe in the past. The Conservatives haven't won any of these wards for decades. UKIP didn't manage to win any gains there at their peak. The combined right bloc vote in 2024 was 22%. As Rob Ward put in the article me and Joe have referenced, like it was in Runcorn and Helsby where Reform gained, they had to get 10% more, 12% more than that. So I do just think in terms of, you know, putting aside the fact that they've picked an awful candidate, I do think just like historically they're quite constrained there. And I think as well, like, you know, because one of the things I was thinking about is Caerphilly, right? Comparison with Caerphilly that you kind of mentioned, Shanice, where the candidate was much more well known, much more well respected in the community. Not any diss to Hannah Spencer, it's just like a much more longer standing member of the community with a kind of successful history in elections and parliamentarism. But then I'm just like, I worked in construction for like on and off for like 10 years. I never met a woman on site. Like all of the stuff aside about how like brilliant she is at communicating politics and being on like the kind of Polanski wing, Greens organized wing of the Greens with the kind of economic politics, the class politics that come with that. I just think like if you're a woman plumber, you got to have some chops. And that will just go a long way in terms of her coming up against someone like Matt Goodwin, who has a lot of chops, but it's all hubristic, basically. So I do think this is the Greens to lose, basically, with the caveat being the Workers' Party. But then the question is raised, you know, what kind of dents can they make? Oh, God, that was an accident. What kind of dents can they make in Denton? You know,
But you know, I do want to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's important that we also don't stereotype the type of people that live in Denton as well, in the sense of you know, white people are pissed off about Gaza as well.
Yeah, exactly.
White working class people are pissed off about the cost of living, and not all these people blame migrants.
Exactly.
In fact, the vast majority of white working class people in this country don't blame migrants for all of their ills. And I think we do sometimes talk in like blocks and identities.
Absolutely.
And these things are relevant and important, but actually they're not fixed, and we shouldn't overgeneralize.
Definitely. And even if you are talking in terms of blocks, you know, the constituency is divided in certain senses, such as, you know, the Gorton side is just like way more Muslim than the Denton side. But actually the difference in, say, like share of graduates is not massive. Like the stats I've got here is 22.5% of people in Denton are graduates, 30.3% of people in Gorton are graduates. So there's a difference, but it's not actually like wild. So no, I completely agree with that. I just think this is the left's to lose, essentially.
Yeah.
And it is just all about cohering that vote behind the Greens. And if you take the Labour votes and you take the Workers' Party vote and you turn out a lot of people, and you have the potential to turn out a lot of people, because it's our voters now, lots of our voters who are the high propensity voters, the voters who actually vote in off elections, in council elections, in by-elections. And it's actually Reform who a lot of their broader base are people who are less likely to vote. So we also have that built-in advantage for a by-election. So yeah, it's definitely ours to lose.
And I do think of like Trump, for example, as a figure, just to kind of ground how the right win. And I compare him to someone like Zoran Mamdani. And actually, both Trump and Zoran Mamdani enthused their base with some kind of euphoria and hope. Obviously, with Trump's version of that, it's violent, it's imperialist, it's racist, but actually it's not very often resentful and vengeful and wounded and injurious. It's often kind of laden with, idea of strength and valor and kind of all that stuff. But fundamentally, it's about euphoria and some kind of hope. And then we contrast that with Zoran Mamdani, of course, a million times better politics on our side. But it also is hope. It's euphoric, People love the character that is Zoran Mamdani. And I think if you compare the kind of direction that the Greens are going in terms of their messaging around hope, around connection, around community, I think that just has the opportunity to do so much more in this election and mobilise people to a much greater extent than Matt Goodwin's zero
dysphoria.
offer. Yeah, complete dysphoria, complete resentment. He's just completely wounded. He's like a bleeding puppy, just like, oh, everything is just so wrong. I lost my career. These woke liberals, they voted they hate Brexit, and they got me booted out of my university, and now I have to go with my injured career on GB News with my 80,000 subscribers and cry about how cancelled I've been and how crap my life is. And it's just like, dude, it's not winning. It's just not winning.
And I think that sense of grievance like drives a small minority very hard in a very intense way and deeply appeals to them. But I think as a majority project, it's just, I don't know. I just don't think it has legs.
The whole thing was make America great again.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like it's about greatness. It's about strength. It's about power. It's about hope. It's not just about being a victim. And there's just something so pathetic about Matt Goodwin.
Yeah,
it's just gross.
I'm gonna go canvas. I'm gonna go up and knock on some doors for her.
Oh, give me a shout. I might do that as well.
Yeah, mate, we'll do it. It'll be fun. We'll do some vox pops, like proper journalists.
I think there is like a really important point in the end of what you said there, Shanice, which is as well as this being a broader fork in the road in the politics and a kind of fork in the road for Labourism and for the Greens, this is really a big fork in the road for the right and for reform as well, about like, to what extent they've hit their ceiling, what kind of coalitions they can build, like the limits of the kind of Britannia Unchained style politics. Will they tack left? On economic questions? All of these things are really boiling down now and coming to a fore, imposing big doubts about their propensity to win an election in 2029. Okay, you've heard it from us. Big prediction on Life of the Party is that the working class Green plumber comrade Hannah Spencer is going to smash apart the Chat GPT Nazi Matt Goodwin.
Brilliant. Man, he's been dug out in this episode so hard.
We got to get his name in the title. Finally, to round out, what should everyone else be reading or listening to this week? Shanice.
Before actually we do reading, I need to cancel someone, and his name is Harry Holmes. Harry Holmes is cancelled, guys. I wanted to hang out with him, and he said he doesn't hang out with podcasters anymore. So Harry Holmes is cancelled. That's the first thing. Second, reading. I love you, Harry. Don't worry. It's all bants.
That doesn't sound like it.
So my reading is, as I mentioned it earlier, but James Bloodworth, he wrote an article called Matt Goodwin, Reform and the Politics of Resentment, that really just kind of tracks this character development, this character arc of Matt Goodwin over the last few years. I actually forgot to mention, did you know Matt Goodwin from 2013 to 2015 was an advisor to the government on tackling anti-Muslim hatred? So yeah, quite the journey he's been on. Yeah, it's a really good article that is, I think, kind of looks at his academic career, kind of dismantles him psychologically to kind of really get kind of underneath who this character is. And I think just really highlights how much ego and how much emotion is involved in people who kind of take center stage in politics often, and just how much narcissism is involved in politics. And yeah, it's just a really brilliant article that breaks that down. Cheekily as well, I will also say that I am doing a little talk, or I'm being interviewed rather, on Novara's first downstream of the year in real life, IRL. It's called How the Right Are Winning. It's basically the London book launch of Ash Sarkar's book Minority Rule, and I'm going to be in conversation with Michael Walker and Dan Evans. Michael Walker I have spoke about on this podcast before, so those who have been following the
you guys
the story,
are actually debating. You guys are actually
well,
debating.
No, yeah,
Fuck,
we're actually going to be in conversation.
That's why you start a podcast, just so you can call out other podcasters and get them to debate you. It's totally worked for you.
That is 100% why Shanice is doing this podcast. that's why she signed up to Life of the Party.
So if you are in London, it's the 16th of Feb. Do come to that. And that's me. I'm done.
Joe.
I've been reading. I've read over the past 2 weeks A Very British Coup by Chris Mullen. So this is a book written in 1982, and it's about a socialist steelworker. I think it was a steelworker called Harry Perkins, who becomes leader of the Labour Party and then ends up becoming Prime Minister. And it basically just talks through all of the various establishment machinations against him and how they managed to engineer his downfall. And it's just a really fun little book, and it's a very easy read. I think it's a great primer to give to people on, like, well, okay, let's just think deeply about what might actually happen if we take control of the state. I suppose it's quite pessimistic. It doesn't really allow much room for Perkins to succeed, despite portraying Perkins as incredibly competent and like thoughtful and tactful and stuff. And it is also set in the age before mass communications and 24-hour news media and the internet and stuff. So it has this sense of kind of slowness to it that you think running the country would not have these days, because everything's communicated by phone and on paper. But it's really good, and I'd really recommend it.
The film is good crack as well.
Oh, is there a film?
Yeah,
I did not know there was a film.
I think it was on 4OD last time I looked.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so mine is an interview on Labour reporter Eric Blanc's Substack, American Labour reporter Eric Blanc, with an organizer in Minneapolis called Arushani AJ, at the forefront of the mass uprising against Trump's fascist ICE gangs. I mean, I'd really just reading it, I was just like, on the left, we should be talking about this a lot more. Like the detail in this interview is really spectacular, but like what's going on is like really quite outstanding. Like mass civil disobedience, a citywide general strike, like networks of like tens of thousands of people doing like observation training, like patrolling kids to protect them from ICE as they go to school, and the detail in it of like, you know, obviously we've seen recently the ICE murders of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Pretty, and those murders occurred within a 10-minute drive of each other off the same main road, also within a 10-minute drive and off the same main road as where George Floyd was killed. George Floyd's murder sparked off the Black Lives Matter Black Lives Matter movement, which was one of the biggest social movements in the history of America. And I just think it's a really good interview, and we should be thinking about that seriously. One, to think about, obviously we've kind of poured cold water on reform today and their chances, but we should be thinking about that in terms of the kind of preparing for the possibility of a Farage government. And as a kind of sidebar, I've also been watching loads of these quite cool videos of this group called Brass Solidarity, which is a brass band, going to all of the demos and just doing bangers basically. Really recommend that interview. I really recommend checking out Brass Solidarity.
The US really know how to do fascism, and they really know how to do resistance. It's 100%.
It's really
a nation of extremes.
Yeah, it's really, really true. And that's it until next time. Thanks for joining us, guys. In the meantime, give us your feedback by leaving comments on Spotify, Apple, sending us an email on life.oftheparty@gmail.com, and donating or subscribing to the pod via lifeoftheparty.uk. Safe.
See you later.
Bye.